The knocking was so quiet that Nikolai at first decided it was the wind. The January wind in Krasnopoli could do anything, howl in the chimney so that it seemed as if someone was crying in the attic, and pull the shutters, and throw handfuls of snow at the windows, as if on purpose. Nikolai sat at the table and did not look at the TV, although he was muttering something about the weather in the regions. An open bottle stood in front of him. The bread had dried up since lunch. There was a snowstorm outside, a serious one, not a toy one, with howling and darkness, the kind that happens at the end of January once every few years. The knocking was repeated. Not the wind. The wind doesn't knock like that, evenly, persistently, as if the person knows that they can't hear him, but still doesn't leave. Nikolai didn't get up right away. First he looked at the bottle, then at the door, then again at the bottle. Then he finally got up. He threw the padded jacket right over his t-shirt and went to open it. It was cold in the hallway. He had long since stopped making sure that it was warm there. He opened the door and did not immediately understand what he saw. On the threshold stood a young woman, in a house jacket, thin, knitted for the house, not for the street. On her feet were slippers, wet through and through, from which blue toes were sticking out. In her arms she was holding a child, a girl about 4 years old, wrapped in the same jacket, so that the woman herself stood in front of the January snowstorm almost wide open. The girl was sleeping, or rather, fell into that sleep that very little ones fall into when the strength runs out and the body decides to switch off. The woman looked at Nikolai. Her lips were not just blue, they were the color of the sky before a thunderstorm, and she clearly no longer felt either her lips or cheeks, no hands. But she stood straight, did not cry. She cried more and more, it was visible in her eyes, dry, darkened, with some kind of lifeless calm inside. "Sorry," she said quietly. The voice was even, only slightly breaking on consonants, her teeth were still chattering, no matter how hard she held on. "We have nowhere to sleep. I'm not asking for money, you can just stay warm." Nikolai looked at her for about 3 seconds, then at the girl, then back at her, then silently stepped aside. The woman crossed the threshold. She didn't rush inside, didn't rush, she walked in with dignity, clutching the child, as if it was her own home and she was just returning from the street. Nikolai closed the door. The snowstorm remained outside. The village of Krasnopoli stood away from the main road about 3 kilometers along a country road, which was cleared every once in a while in winter. There were only a few houses in it, less than 40, of which 10 or 20 lived permanently. The rest were summer residents who visited in the summer, and the boarded-up windows of those who left and did not return. Life in such villages goes on as usual, slowly, a little on the outskirts of everything that is happening in the world. Here they know all the neighbors by name, they gossip not with malice, but out of boredom, and help each other not because they want to, but because it is impossible otherwise. Nikolai Grimov's house stood on the edge villages, near the field. A large 5-walled house with a high gate and a long yard, where once everything was in full swing: cows, pigs, chickens, a tractor, a cultivator, the smell of manure and fresh hay, voices, laughter, dog barking. The fence was now askew in 2 places, one board completely fell out, and no one put it back in. The shutter on the right window was hanging on one hinge and slapping in the wind like a blowpalm. In the yard, under a canopy, there was equipment: an old tractor, a cultivator, some other iron, covered with a tarpaulin, stiffened by the frost. Rust was in the corners. No one cleared the snow in the yard, only a path trampled from the gate to the porch, narrow, for one person. Inside the house was alive in the sense that there was electricity burning and the pipes were not frozen. Nikolai watched this mechanically, out of habit, as one watches one's breathing, without thinking, but no more. In the kitchen there were dishes, not dirty in the sink, but simply not placed anywhere, at random. On the table there were traces of recent food, bread crumbs, a stain from a mug. In the large room there was a blanket on the sofa, under the sofa there were slippers. Women's slippers, old, worn, with curved edges. Backdrops. Nikolai hasn't cleaned them for a year and a half. On the shelf by the window there was a mug, white, with a drawing of a red cat with big eyes. Not Nikolai's mug, he drank from another, large one, without any cats. He didn't take this one off the shelf or hide it, it just stood there. In the back room, where he almost never went, on the chest of drawers lay a box, cardboard, from under shoes, tied with braid. There were undershirts in it, small, yellow ones and white ones, still with store labels, booties, a rattle. Everything was bought in advance, with a reserve, as they buy when they are really expecting and really believe that everything will be fine. Nothing good came of it. Marina died at the end of February, a year and a half ago. The maternity hospital was in the regional center, 40 kilometers along a normal road, but that night the road was so snowy that the ambulance got stuck halfway. The doctors later said different things. Nikolai did not listen. He stood in the corridor of the hospital. By some miracle he finally got there, and looked at the white wall. The doctor spoke, but he did not hear. The boy was born alive, but not for long, 7 minutes. Nikolai did not see him. After that, he sold the cattle. Not right away. At first he simply stopped caring for him, and neighbor Petrovich, a good man, took the cows until they were completely gone. Then the pigs left, then the chickens. Farm empty in 3 months. The fields were overgrown that summer. He didn't go out even once. He didn't start drinking right away. At first he just sat, then he began to go out into the yard at night and look at the sky. Then one day he took a bottle, and it helped. Not for long, for about 3 hours, but still. For 3 hours there was no need to think about anything, that seemed enough. A year and a half passed. He looked like he was 50, overgrown, gray, with his hands shaking in the morning. The neighbors said hello, he answered. Sometimes he silently repaired the neighbor's fence, not because they asked, but because his hands remembered how it was done, and sometimes it was better to let them do something. He fed the stray dog Barian every evening, brought out for him what he himself had not eaten. Barian lived under the gate and wagged his tail. This was, perhaps, the most lively thing that happened in Gromov's yard already a very long time ago. The woman he let in was standing in the middle of the kitchen and didn't know where to go. More precisely, she knew that she shouldn't touch anything without permission, and simply held the child. And the child, sensing warmth, began to slowly wake up. He moved, squeaked something unintelligible and fell silent again. Nikolai opened the closet, pulled out an old blanket, it had been there since the fall, clean, and held it out in silence. The woman she took it and wrapped the girl tighter. "Will you have some tea?" he asked. Not out of politeness. He just had to say something. "If it's possible," she answered just as quietly. He turned on the kettle, took out 2 mugs, not the one on the shelf. While the kettle was warming up, he stood at the stove with his back to her and thought about the last time he made tea for someone stranger. He couldn't even remember when. "There's a room," he said, without turning around, and nodded towards the corridor, first door. "There is a bed, put it down." "Thank you," the woman said. He didn't ask anything else, and she didn't explain anything. He poured tea, put it on the table, then went out into the corridor and showed the room. It was a little cold there, the radiator wasn't very warm. He had wanted to clean it for a long time, but he didn't get around to it. The woman didn't show it. She just put the girl to bed, covered her with a blanket, sat down on the edge of the bed. Nikolai returned to the kitchen, drank his tea, then took a bottle, returned to the large room, lay down on the sofa and finished what was left. He fell asleep quickly, the vodka contributed to this. The last thing he heard before falling through was the quiet creaking of the floorboard in the corridor. Something, but he couldn't make out the words. He woke up several times, looked at the ceiling, fell asleep again. In the morning the smell woke him up. He didn't immediately understand what it was. He lay with his eyes closed and thought that he was probably dreaming again. Then he opened his eyes, the smell had not gone away. Hot food. Something boiled, a little milky. Porridge, or what? Eggs, scrambled eggs. He hadn't cooked anything hot already. He honestly tried to remember and couldn't. For sure it had been a week, maybe 2. He ate bread, canned food, sometimes heated something from a can. There hadn't been hot porridge in this house for a very long time. Nikolai stood up, shook his head, driving away the remnants of sleep, and walked into the kitchen. He stopped at the door. The kitchen was different. It was simply not renovated. Another. The dishes that had been standing haphazardly for the last few weeks were washed and put in their places. The table, which he didn't even notice how it had become gray, covered in rings from mugs, covered in crumbs, was scrubbed. The floor was swept. On the stove stood a pot of porridge and a frying pan with scrambled eggs. The kettle was hot, had just boiled. The woman stood at the window and looked out. Yard. With her back to him. Her hair was dark, tied hastily into a ponytail, from which several strands had fallen out. She was wearing the same jacket, her only clothes, but already dry. On her feet were slippers. His slippers, which he kept in the hallway in reserve. The girl was sitting on a stool. Her eyes were large, serious, not childishly serious, as is the case with children who are early learned not to make noise. She held the mug with both hands and looked at Nikolai without fear, but also without a smile. I just watched the way someone very small looks, who has already seen a lot and now evaluates everyone carefully before deciding whether he can trust. Nikolai stood in the doorway and did not know what to say. The woman turned around. "Good morning," she said calmly. Uningratiatingly, innocently, simply, "I hope you don't against. I needed something to do with my hands." He was silent for another 3 seconds, then said, "I don't mind." He sat down at the table. She put a plate of porridge and scrambled eggs, bread in front of him. She poured tea. She did all this deftly, without fuss, like a person who knows how to manage and doesn't think about it. He ate. He hasn't eaten like this for a long time, at the table, hot, normal. Usually, standing at the sink or straight from the pan. Now he sat and ate, and it was strange. Not unpleasant, namely, it's strange, as if something forgotten had suddenly returned. "My name is Alina," she said, sitting down opposite. "And this is Sonia." "Nikolai," he answered. The girl looked at him over the top of her mug very seriously. "Sonia," he told her. Not interrogatively, but just like that. She nodded. They were silent. Nikolai finished the scrambled eggs, pushed the plate away. "Where are you from?" he asked. "Not out of special curiosity, I just had to ask." Alina answered briefly, without plaintive notes, almost in a businesslike manner, as the facts report, "My husband kicked me out. On the highway, at night, in a snowstorm. Documents and phone were left at home. Mother died 2 years ago. There was nowhere to go." Nikolai listened and did not look at her, he looked into his mug. Then he asked, "And this is how children are kicked out?" "They're kicking me out," she said simply. He looked up at her. She didn't look away, she looked straight, without straining, didn't expect pity. She just told it like it is. "Live for now," Nikolai said. "There's a lot of space." She nodded, "Thank you." They didn't talk about this anymore. After breakfast, Sonia dozed off again. She didn't get much sleep, she was cold yesterday, and her body was taking over. Alina put her to bed and went out into the yard. Just to look. She grew up in a small village, further from here to the north, where her mother kept a vegetable garden and 12.5 chickens. And Alina knew from childhood how it all works, how to feed, and how to clean, and how to prepare the soil in the spring. This knowledge had not gone anywhere, it was just lying inside, and used, like a tool in a box. She walked around the yard carefully. The barns were large, strong, made of timber, not rotten. The chicken coop was empty, but clean, which means it had been kept recently. The cattle shed was also empty, but the fence around it was intact, only the gate needed to be repaired. Under the canopy was a tractor. Old, but judging by the way it stood, not abandoned for good, just mothballed. Nearby there is a cultivator. The tools in the shed are rusty, but there is a complete set. She stood by the field outside the gate. The field is not built up. It's large, 3 hectares, no less. Overgrown in appearance, but the ground under the snow was alive. She felt it somehow. Not with the mind, but with this very village knowledge that the townspeople don't understand. It was all alive. Abandoned, but alive. In the evening, when Sonia was fiddling with the wooden cubes found in a box, and Nikolai was sitting at the table and reaching for a bottle, Alina took out a squared notebook from the same box, old, half empty, and a pencil. "May I?" she asked. Nikolai shrugged. "Take it." She opened the notebook and began to write in columns, numbers, words, arrows. Nikolai looked and looked, then could not stand it. "What are you doing?" "I think so," she answered without looking up. He stood up, walked over, looked over his shoulder. On the page it was written, "What is on the farm, what is needed approximately, prices, terms. Chickens are the fastest, you can have eggs by spring. Vegetable garden, planting material, maybe there is something left in the basement from last year? We need to check. 2 cows by summer, if you find an installment plan or negotiate with farmers in the neighboring area." Nikolai looked aphis. Something dull rose in his chest. Not even anger, but something similar to it. "This is my farm," he said. "I know it myself." Alina put away the notebook calmly, without offense. "Of course," she said. She didn't argue, didn't explain, she just put it away. But she didn't throw away the notebook, she put it neatly in the table drawer. Nikolai returned to the sofa. He took the bottle, put it down. He took it again, put it down. There was a chalk snowstorm outside the window, the same as yesterday, or a new one. In January they walked one after another. Sonia was sleeping in the back room, the clock was ticking in the kitchen. Nikolai lay and looked at ceiling. I thought about the notebook, about the numbers in it. That he knew it all, every figure, every deadline, every position. He knew and didn't he do it? He didn't he do it for a year and a half? And she came from the street in wet slippers, with someone else's child in her arms, and in one morning she counted everything that he had put off for 2 years. The bottle stood on the edge of the sofa. He lay and looked at the ceiling, then took the bottle and put it under the sofa. For the first time in a very long time. Not because I decided something, not because I promised myself, I just put it away, and that's it. I lay further and looked at the ceiling. I thought about the chickens, about the field, about the tractor under the canopy, which he hadn't started for 2 summers. About whether it would start. Probably it would start. It's a good one, a Belarus brand tractor, it was almost new when we bought it. We bought it together with Marina. She then laughed that he was talking to the tractor as if it were a living being, persuading it to start in the cold. And he said, how else, you have to do it right with technology. He looked at the ceiling for a long time and thought about it, then fell asleep. Without vodka, he just fell asleep. Outside the window, the January wind was howling, firewood was crackling in the stove, in the back room a girl named Sonia was quietly breathing. The house was full of people for the first time in a year and a half. The first days were strange. Not bad, but strange, as happens when in a house that has stood for a long time quiet, suddenly sounds appear. The creaking of a floorboard at 6 in the morning, it's Alina who gets up before everyone else and goes to light the stove. A quiet voice, it's her telling Sonia something in a low voice so as not to wake her up. The smell of boiled potatoes or fried onions. The splash of water. All these were the most ordinary sounds of ordinary life, but Nikolai had not heard them for so long that now they woke him up. He lay with his eyes open and did not understand what was happening. Then he remembered and didn't he know what to do about it. He got annoyed. Not at Alina specifically, he was just annoyed. At the fact that someone had rearranged his slippers. At the fact that his mug was not where he was used to. At the fact that Sonia's jacket, issued from old things that were found in the closet, someone else's, from someone else's shoulder is now hanging in the hallway next to his jacket. The fact that someone moved his newspapers. Little things, nonsense, but several times he answered harshly. Not rudely, but coldly, as people who have lived alone for a long time and are unaccustomed to agreeing with anyone can do anything. Alina did not answer this. Not because she was afraid, he felt it. She just looked at him calmly and was silent. As if she understood, this is not anger, this is a habit, this is pain that can't do it any other way. Once on the third day he said sharply, "Don't rearrange my things." She looked at him, nodded and said, "Okay." No offense, no tears, she just took note. He then went out into the yard and looked at the field for a long time. Went into another room when he came in. If he sat down in the kitchen, she stopped eating and looked at the table. If he said anything, she didn't answer, she just snuggled up to her mother. Nikolai didn't force, didn't try to please, didn't lure, he just minded his own business and didn't touch her. One day, about 5 days after their appearance, he climbed into the attic for some necessary thing and found it there among the old Trasha wooden horse. Homemade, rough, his father carved it once, Nikolai himself played with it. Darkened wood, a naive face with painted eyes, a tail made of rope. He stood with it, turned it over in his hands. Then he went downstairs and silently put the horse on the floor in the corridor where Sonia usually tinkered with her few toys. He didn't say anything. Just put it down and went out into the yard. In the evening, passing by, I saw Sonia was squatting in front of the horse and telling her something in a whisper. Seriously, in detail, as one speaks to someone important. Nikolai stopped for a second, then quickly went out into the street and stood there for a long time, looking into the dark sky, where the moon could be seen behind the clouds. Barian came up and buried his nose in his hand. Yes, he told him, Nikolai out loud, like this. Weeds wagged his tail. The real first conversation happened unexpectedly, 10 days later, when Nikolai went out to repair the porch. The step was completely loose, he noticed it back in the fall, but put it off. Now he came out with nails and a hammer, sat down. He worked silently, as usual. Then he heard the creak of the door, careful, quiet. Turned around. Sonia stood on the threshold and looked at him. In his hands, that same horse. He turned away and continued to work, let him stand there if he wants. She stood there, then came out and stood next to him very close, almost at his shoulder. She watched him hammer in a nail. She looked silently for a long time. Then she said, "Uncle Kolya, let me hold it." Her voice was quiet, but firm. Not begging, but stating, "Let me hold it, and that's all." Nikolai looked at her. She looked at the hammer. He handed her a hammer, small, just under a child's hand. She took it with both hands, very seriously, knelt down next to him and hit the nail. Once, second. Wryly, of course, but with complete seriousness and complete dedication. "That's it," Nikolai said. She nodded. He laughed, quietly, almost in surprise, the way one laughs when laughter comes on its own, without invitation. Not at her, just like that, from something warm inside. Alina stood by the window and looked at them. He didn't see her. Alina never pressed. This was, perhaps, the strangest thing for Nikolai. He was waiting for pressure, advice, conversations that he couldn't live like this. He heard this from his neighbor Nina, from Petrovich, from his cousin, who came in September. Everyone talked, everyone advised. He didn't listen. Alina didn't say anything. It's just that when in the evening he reached for the bottle, at that moment she sat down next to a mug of tea and started talking about something. About the fact that Sonia came up with a name for the horse today, Chamomile, for some reason. About the fact that Nina's neighbor, it turns out, has friends who sell young chickens in the spring, the price is normal. About the fact that in the basement she found several bags of seeds, whole, sealed, from last year, they should sprout. She was just talking nearby. Sometimes they were silent, and that was also normal. Nikolai noticed gradually that the evening bottle became half a bottle, then a glass. Then sometimes he just put it down back, without opening it, and took the mug. He didn't think of it as a decision, it just happened that way. The night when he told her about Marina came in mid-February. He himself didn't know how it happened. I went to bed normally, woke up at 3 o'clock and couldn't do it anymore. I lay there, looking at the ceiling. The ceiling was pressing. He got up, got dressed, went out into the yard. The frost was not severe, 15 degrees, no more. Quiet, the stars. He sat down on the step of the porch and looked at the sky. The door creaked 10 minutes later. Alina came out in his old sheepskin coat, which was hanging in hallway, put her feet in her boots, silently sat down next to her. He didn't ask why she got up, she didn't explain. They were silent for a long time. Then he said, not to her, but rather to the sky, her name was Marina. Alina didn't move, she just listened. We lived here for 6 years. She came from Tambov. She was so funny, she was afraid of cows. Then she got used to it, she milked herself, he was silent, they were waiting for a boy. I had already thought of a name. The road was snowy. Alina didn't say anything. She didn't console. She didn't say everything will be fine or time heals. She just sat next to her. And it was right, because words were of no use here. And she understood this. Then she said quietly, not questioningly, she was happy with you. This can be seen by what you were like before. How do you know what I was like before? Nina told. He was silent. Nina tells a lot, she is a kind person. Kind, he agreed. The stars hung low. The weeds got out from under the gate and lay down at his feet. I think it's my fault, said Nikolai. We should have taken it earlier. I thought we'll make it in time. You couldn't know about the blizzard, no. But everyone thinks about it day. Alina didn't say anything to this. She didn't try to dissuade her, that would be stupid and untruthful. She just sat. Then Nikolai stood up, it's cold. Let us go into the house. She got up. They went. In the kitchen, he poured tea for both of them and didn't talk about Marina anymore. And she didn't ask. But something has changed since that night. Something has become a little easier. Not gone, not forgotten, but just a little lighter. As happens when you carry something heavy alone for a long time and suddenly someone stands next to you. Doesn't take the burden, but just stands there. And no longer so lonely with this difficult thing. They bought the chickens in early March. We went to the neighboring village together. Sonia stayed with Nina, who from the first day took a liking to the girl and tried to treat her with something at every opportunity. The owner had a small farm, strong, the same as Nikolai once had. She sold young chickens, almost laying hens. Alina bargained busily and without embarrassment. Nikolai stood nearby and did not interfere, he watched. She knew what she was talking about. She looked at the bird, felt it, asked about food, about illnesses, about the release of eggs. The owner respected her, it was clear. They took 12 chickens and a rooster. On the way home, Nikolai suddenly said, I'll clean the chicken coop. The bedding there needs to be changed. I'll help, said Alina. No need, on my own. She didn't argue. He cleaned the chicken coop alone that same evening, silently and thoroughly, as he had done before, when the whole household rested on it. The hands remembered. The hands generally remembered everything. It was almost strange how easily they remembered what the heads seemed to have long forgotten. When the chickens settled on their roosts and fell silent, he came out of the chicken coop and stopped in the middle of the yard. The yard smelled of manure and hay, for the first time in a year and a half. He stood for a while, then went into the house. The seeds were found in the basement. Alina was right, several packages neatly signed in Marina's handwriting. Tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, carrots, onions. And separately wrapped in paper a bag of cherry tomatoes. On the bag it was written, decorative, but tasty. Nikolai took this bag and held it in his hands for a long time, looking at the handwriting. Alina stood nearby and was silent. She always planted them, he said. She said, they are decorative, they look beautiful on the bush. I also have cherry tomatoes, said Alina. I bought them last week in the regional center. Let us plant them nearby. Simple, without strain. We'll just plant it nearby, that's all. We'll plant it, Nikolai agreed. He put the bag back with the rest of the seeds. That day he took the tractor out from under the canopy and tried to start it. It didn't start the first time, the battery was dead, I had to light it from the car. But it started. He rumbled, released a cloud of blue smoke and started working more smoothly, as if he himself was glad that he was finally remembered. Petrovich walked past, heard, looked through the gate. Koka, are you alive or what? Nikolai looked at him from behind the hood. Alive, well, thank God. Petrovich scratched the back of his head, and then they thought. In vain. Petrovich stood a little longer, nodded and moved on. Nikolai looked after him and thought that he had not talked to people like this for a long time, briefly, normally, humanly. Alina changed slowly, and maybe that's why it was so noticeable, how something changes when it happens gradually and for real. At first she flinched from sharp sounds, she would drop something and freeze for a second, her shoulders rise. Glance. Didn't he notice when it passed? She began to eat normally. At first she ate little out of habit or because she was shy, Nikolai didn't know. Now she ate like a person who likes food and who allows herself to enjoy it. It was pleasant to look at, in a simple, humanly pleasant way. She gained a little weight. She didn't become plump, she just stopped being painfully thin. Her face became different, less sharp, less wary, the cheeks appeared. The eyes became a different color, or something. Or just the look became different. And the eyes, when you look with other eyes, also seem different. Her hair, she hadn't cut it for a long time, let it go, and it managed to grow below her shoulders. Now she braided her braid in the morning, not a thin city braid, but a normal village braid, thick, dark. And it suited her in such a way that Nikolai caught himself several times on what she was looking at. Sonia was the first to notice this. One morning, when Alina was braiding her hair at the mirror in the hallway, Sonia came up, looked up and said, "Mom, you've become beautiful." Alina laughed, quietly, a little embarrassedly. "What do you think?" "Yes," said Sonia seriously. "It wasn't like that before." Nikolai stood in the corridor with a mug and pretended to look out the window. He didn't think about transformation in those words, he didn't think about it separately at all, it just happened. His own transformation also happened gradually. One day Alina took a shirt out of the closet, checkered, flannel, his shirt, washed, ironed. She said, "Neutral, yours, I found it in the closet." He put it on. For some reason, after that he went into the room and looked at himself in the mirror for the first time in a very long time. There was reflected an overgrown man with dark circles under his eyes and unwashed hair in a good plaid shirt. The contrast was funny and a little unpleasant. The next day he went to the regional center. For the first time driving sober in a year and a half. His hands tensed a little when sat down, then nothing, he let go. The road was normal, it was quiet in the salon. In the regional center, he went to the hairdresser, the first one he came across. There, an elderly woman with glasses, who didn't ask for anything and worked quickly, cut her hair. He shaved there, at the counter with a mirror. Then he went into the store and bought normal products, meat, vegetables, good butter. And he didn't buy vodka. Not because he forbade himself, just didn't take it. He returned home in the evening. Alina looked at him from the stove. She looked carefully, silently. Then she said quietly, "Now he looks like, who?" he asked. She smiled a little and turned to the stove. He put the groceries down and went to change clothes. In the evening at dinner, Sonia looked at him for a long time, then said, "Uncle Kolya, you are different today." "Which one?" she thought seriously. "Normal." Nikolai laughed. A few weeks later the village began to notice. Neighbor Nina was the first to say to Petrovich, "Look, Coca has come to life." Petrovich once came into the yard to ask about a spare part and found Nikolai repairing a cultivator. His hands are covered in oil, parts are laid out under a canopy, next to a mug of tea. "What are you doing?" Petrovich asked. "I'm preparing for spring." "For spring," Petrovich repeated. He trampled, "Well, that's right. It's high time. I came in again next week, just like that, for no reason." He and Nikolai stood by the tractor, talked about equipment, about last year's harvest, about the fact that in the neighboring area there will be good piglets by April. The conversation was the most ordinary about the farm, but Nikolai suddenly caught himself that he didn't want Petrovich to leave. It became pleasant to just talk with people. Petrovich, leaving, said, "Your woman is smart." Nikolai remained silent. "I say, smart. Nina says she understands the farm." "She understands," Nikolai agreed. "Well, good," said Petrovich and went. The end of February was quiet. The farm woke up slowly, as all living things wake up after a long sleep, with effort, with a crunch, but inevitably. The chickens were already giving eggs, not a lot, but they did. There was a cultivator repaired. Seeds were laid out in the basement. Nikolai agreed with a man in the neighboring area about 2 dairy cows by April. Alina kept a notebook, the same one from the box. The numbers in it changed, some tasks were closed, new ones appeared. Nikolai now looked at this notebook without irritation. He sometimes took it, studied it, added it in his handwriting next to her notes. She didn't say anything about this, just accepted. One evening he said, "Do you have any education?" "Accounting college," she said. "I didn't graduate, I got married." "I see. Why do you ask?" "I'm thinking about how to work with sales. They need a person who knows how to count." She looked at him. "I can count." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm asking." This was, perhaps, the first time he told her something directly, that she was needed, that she lived here for a reason. She understood this. She turned to the window, and he did not see her face. But by the way she held her shoulders straightened, calmly, I realized that everything was fine. Late evening at the end of February. Sonia fell asleep earlier than usual, got worn out during the day. Nina took her with her for a walk, and the girl returned red from the frost and happy. Now the house was quiet. They sat by the stove together, Alina with a notebook, Nikolai just like that, with a mug. The stove was crackling. Outside the window there was a blue winter night, no longer a blizzard, but just a quiet frost. Beautiful patterns were frozen on the glass from the inside. Nikolai looked at the fire through the crack in the stove door. Then he said quietly, without looking at her, "Have you thought about what's next?" Alina raised her head from her notebook. She was silent for a while. "I was thinking. But I don't want to think yet." He nodded. "Okay," he said, and nothing more. They sat by the stove, the fire was crackling, Sonia was sleeping in the next room, and there was frost outside the window. And both understood that something had changed. Not now, not at this moment, but gradually, imperceptibly, how everything real changes, without announcements and without theater. Just has changed. March came with the sun, sharp, not yet warm, but already real, spring. So that the snow began to settle and glittered at noon so much that it hurt the eyes. Krasnopoli came to life. Firewood was delivered to Petrovich. Nina put a tub of seedlings on the porch. A tractor with a bucket passed along the village road. For the first time in the winter, they were cleaning countryside. On Gromov's farm, things were also going well. The chickens were laying regularly, 8 to 10 eggs a day. Alina put some of them aside for sale. She agreed with Nina, she took it for herself and passed it on to the neighbors. The money was small, but it was the first money from the farm in a year and a half. 2 heifers were supposed to be brought from the neighboring area in April. Nikolai agreed, made a deposit. 2 were grunting in the barn a pig bought at the end of February. Nikolai had been sober for more than a month. Not because he made a vow, it just happened that way, day after day. And at some point he realized that he was not reaching for the bottle in the evening. Not because he forgot about Marina, no. It's just that life became denser, or something. Denser and warmer. The village saw this. Nina told Petrovich, Petrovich told his wife, she said further, Koka has come to life, he has become completely different. And his woman is gold. Sonechka is following him with her tail. That morning, when in the yard someone else's car drove in, Nikolai was in the barn looking at the piglets, thinking about when to let them out into the pen. Alina was cooking in the kitchen. Sonia was sitting by the window and drawing. Nina gave her an album and colored pencils, and now the girl was drawing from morning to evening, horses, chickens, a house with a chimney. The car drove through the open gate without knocking and without warning. Alina recognized her immediately, by the brand, by the color, by the way she stood, a little askew, as if the driver was used to being allowed everywhere. She lowered the spoon, took Sonia in her arms. Sonia squeaked in surprise, not having time to take the album. Alina stood in the middle of the kitchen and looked out the window. Her face became white. Not gray, not frightened, but precisely white. As happens when something has already happened inside, but outside you are still holding on. You got out of the car, Dennis. He was about 30. Tall, in a good jacket, well-groomed, exactly the type who at first glance seems like a decent person. Pleasant face, calm movements. He looked around the yard with the air of a man who has come to where he has the right to come. Behind him came a woman of about 60, in an expensive fur coat, with pursed lips and a look that people know how to look at, convinced that the whole world around them is arranged incorrectly and only they know how it should be. Tamara Ivanovna. Alina knew her well. Nikolai came out of the barn at the sound of the car, stopped. He looked at the strangers in the yard, then at the kitchen window and saw Alina there with Sonia in her arms. That was enough. He went out into the middle of the yard and stood up, calmly, without haste. Dennis noticed him, smiled confidently, a little condescendingly. Master? He asked. Master, Nikolai confirmed. Listen, we are like a family, without unnecessary things. Dennis spoke easily, as people say who know how to pretend that everything is fine. My wife and daughter are here, Alina. He shouted to the house, come out, that's enough already. The door creaked. Alina went out onto the porch. She held Sonia in her arms, she hid her face in her shoulder and did not look. Alina looked at Dennis directly, without words. Tamara Ivanovna looked around the yard, fixed her gaze on Nikolai, on the barn, on the chicken coop. She looked at Alina from top to bottom, as usual as she looked always. So I've already found it, she said. I didn't think for long. Nikolai turned to her. This woman lives in my house, he said evenly. The child lives in my house. You stopped by without an invitation. You have a minute. Tamara Ivanovna opened her mouth. Dennis stopped smiling. Easy, he said. Who are you anyway? Master, Nikolai repeated. I already said. She is my wife. Dennis stepped forward. I have the right. Call the police, said Nikolai. At the same time, explain to the duty officer how your wife ended up on the federal highway in a January snowstorm, in home clothes, with a 4-year-old child. Without documents. Without a phone. In slippers. Dennis fell silent. There are witnesses, Nikolai added. There is a truck driver who saw her and drove her to the village. I know him. He also remembers. In fact, Nikolai didn't know any driver. It was Alina who told about the truck that slowed down on the highway and took them to the turn to Krasnopoly. But Dennis didn't know this. Dennis looked at him, there was no longer a smile. Tamara Ivanovna made a different move. Sonia, she called sweetly, go to grandma, baby. Sonia buried herself deeper into her mother's shoulder. Sonia, stricter. The girl did not move. Tamara Ivanovna turned to Alina. We have documents for the child. Birth certificate. have you thought about this? I thought, said Alina. For the first time she opened her mouth since she came out onto the porch. The voice was even. The hands that held Sonia tensed a little. Nikolai saw it, but the voice did not waver. I will file for divorce. Sonia will stay with me. Leave. It cost her effort, he saw it. But they didn't he see it. They saw a woman who looks at them calmly and says what she says. Dennis exchanged glances with his mother. Let us see, he said. Who will stay with whom? You have no registration, no work, no housing. And I have an apartment, an official job and a retired mother, ready to help with the child. The court will sort it out. It will sort it out, Nikolai agreed. Dennis looked at him. They don't ask you. No, I don't, said Nikolai. But the lawyer will ask. Get into the car. They drove away, slowly, with dignity, without running away, making it clear that it was they themselves who decided to leave. The car rolled out the gate. Nikolai stood in the middle of the yard and looked after. Then he turned around. Alina stood on the porch and looked at him. Sonia raised her head, she looked too. Nikolai went up to the porch. They will return, he said. I know, Alina answered. We need to go to a lawyer. Today or tomorrow. She nodded. He climbed the step. They turned out to be almost the same height, face to face. And he said quietly, only for her, I want to leave you alone with this. She looked at him. For a long time. Then she nodded. And this nod was different, not just agreement, there was something more in it. Sonia looked at both of them in turn, then rubbed her nose and said, I'm hungry. Nikolai laughed, unexpectedly for himself, let's go. It is what it is. A lawyer in the regional center received them the next day. A young man, businesslike, concrete, one of those who knows how to listen quickly and speak to the point. His name was Andrei Viktorovich. He wrote down everything that Alina said, asked several clarifying questions, without unnecessary emotions, as it should be. The situation is not easy, but not hopeless, he said. My husband really has a place to live and a job, these a plus for him. But there is something else. If you have ever gone to the emergency room with injuries and there are records there, this is important. Alina was silent. I contacted you once. 2 years ago. She said that she fell. There is a medical record, there is a record. You can request it. Plus witness testimony. There are people who can confirm the fact of what happened on the highway, the driver of the truck, said Nikolai. Alina, do you remember at least something? Car number, what company? She thought. On the cabinet was written. Red, large letters. I didn't remember well, we were, she stopped. I remembered that he was not young. Mustached. He gave Sonia a chocolate bar. That's already something, said Andrei Viktorovich. Let us try to find. Plus the child's place of residence. If you register them here, this gives the court grounds to consider this place as permanent. Nikolai said, I'll write it down. I've already decided. The lawyer nodded, then let us begin. The first step is an application for divorce. At the same time, an application to determine the child's place of residence. We file a lawsuit at the defendant's place of residence or at yours. We choose what is more profitable. In ours, said Nikolai. Alina looked at him. In our opinion, she confirmed. On the way home they were silent. It wasn't hard, everyone was just thinking about their own things. Already at the entrance to the village Alina asked, do you understand what you are doing? I understand, said Nikolai. This is not out of pity? He paused, looked at the road. No, he said. Not out of pity. She didn't ask again, turned to the window. Fields floated behind the glass. The snow was already settling, and in some places dark earth could be seen from under it, alive, ready for spring. When they arrived home, Varian was waiting for them at the gate. Wagged his tail, jumped up. Sonia, whom they took from Nina, along the way, rushed to him with a joyful cry. Weeds fell on his side and exposed his belly. Everything was almost normal. Almost, because somewhere there, in the city, preparations were being made for the trial, and it was not scary, but serious. Nikolai understood this, Alina too. That night Nikolai did not sleep. Not because of anxiety, he just lay there and thought. Thought about how everything had turned out. For a year and a half he lived here alone, and his life was empty. Not terrible, not tragic on any given day, but empty. Like an empty house, the walls stand, the roof does not leak, but nothing inside. Emptiness. Then they knocked on the door. He got up and went to kitchen. Alina was sitting at the table with a mug. She didn't sleep either. She saw him, she wasn't surprised. She got up, put the kettle on. He sat down at the table. She poured him tea and sat down opposite again. I thought for a long time, he said. It seems to me that she wouldn't want me to live like that. Alina knew that he was talking about Marina, she didn't ask again. I think she would want you to be happy, she said quietly, you helped me remember what it's like to live. To truly live, they were silent, I don't know how to say it correctly. I haven't spoken for a long time, you speak well, Alina answered. He put his hand on the table, just like that, next to her hand. She looked at his hand, then covered it with hers. We sat like that in silence, and the kettle was cooling on the stove. Outside the window it was a spring night, no longer January, the other, with the smell of snow and thawed earth. There was no need to say anything, everything important had already been said. A few days later, Sonia found Nikolai alone at breakfast. She entered the kitchen in pajamas, with a horse daisy under her arm, with her hair disheveled after sleep. She stood next to him, looked seriously. Then she asked, Uncle Kolya, are you my dad now? Nikolai lowered the mug. It became quiet in the kitchen, only the stove was humming. He looked towards the corridor. Alina stood in the doorway, she heard. She looked at him. He leaned towards Sonia. The girl looked at him completely seriously, the way she knew how to look with that adult look on her small face. Do you want him to be? He asked. Sonia thought for a second, then nodded also seriously, thoroughly, as one nods when a decision has already been made. Then I will, said Nikolai. Sonia nodded again, agreed, and climbed onto the stool next to him. She put chamomile on the table, took the mug. Nikolai looked at Alina. She looked at them both and smiled really, widely, the way he had for a long time didn't see her. Then she went into the kitchen and started breakfast. That same day Nikolai went to the regional center. He didn't say where he was going, he just got into the car and drove off. He returned 2 hours later with a large package. Sonia was in the yard with Barian. He approached her, squatted down and took out a horse from the bag, a soft, large, red one, with a white spot on its forehead and a fluffy mane. Sonia looked at she took her with both hands and pressed her to her. Then she looked at Nikolai, what's her name, just think of it. Sonia thought long and seriously, Zarya, good name. She nodded, yes, good. And she went to introduce Zarya to Romashka. Nikolai stood there, looking after her. Then he remembered that he once stood in a toy store with Marina. They were choosing a rattle even before birth, laughing at funny little animals. This memory rose, passed through him and didn't he hit? It just passed quietly, like something passes with which one has finally made peace. Denis and Tamara Ivanovna returned at the end of March. On this time with papers. Denis was holding some kind of printed document. Tamara Ivanovna was in the same fur coat and with the same expression on her face. Nikolai met them at the gate. Not in the yard, at the gate, outside. We are official, said Denis, I have the right to see my daughter. You have, Nikolai agreed, through the court. They will determine the order of meetings there, you are not my decree. That's right. But my lawyer has already submitted an application. Submit yours too, as you wish. Denis opened his mouth, closed it. Tamara Ivanovna stepped forward. Such a woman who left her husband and lives with a strange man is not a mother. The court will take this into account. Nikolai looked at her calmly, without anger. I have a question. When was the last time you saw your granddaughter before today? When was the last time you asked about her health? Do you know how she sleeps? What does she eat? What is he afraid of? What is the name of her favorite toy? Tamara Ivanovna was silent. The horse's name is Romashka, said Nikolai. And the new one is Zarya. Favorite food is potatoes with milk and a piece of butter. She is afraid of sharp sounds, but less than 2 months ago. I know this because I'm here. Every day. Tamara Ivanovna looked at him. Something in her trembled. Not repentance, no, for this you need another Persanbi. But something. She pursed her lips. See you in court, Denis said angrily, quietly. See you, Nikolai agreed. The lawyer was warned. The car drove away. This time there was something final in it, like a wave that goes away, which knows that it will not cover you again. Maybe Denis felt that he couldn't break anything here. Maybe the lawyer explained to him what the story with the highway looks like in court. Maybe Tamara Ivanovna decided that she never needed a granddaughter from the village, she just wanted to play at being right. Be that as it may, they never came again. The trial took place in April. The testimony of the truck driver was found. Andrei Viktorovich turned out to be a persistent person. He found the company, found the flight, found the driver. He remembered, of course he remembered, this is not forgotten. A young woman with a little girl on the highway at night in a snowstorm in home clothes. Medical records were found, witnesses were found. Nina gave her testimony calmly and in detail, like a person who has something to say and who is not afraid to speak. Denis did not appear at the second meeting. Sonia remained with her mother. Place of residence, the village of Krasnopoly, the house of Nikolai Sergeyevich Gromov. The divorce was filed. Alina walked out of the courthouse onto the street, stood on the steps. Nikolai stood nearby. She made several deep breaths of April air, still a little cold, but already with the smell of earth and last year's grass. That's it? She asked. That's it, he said. She nodded. They went to the car. They had to go back. Sonia is there with Nina. There are chickens, there are heifers that were brought a week ago and who were not yet used to it. They were worried. There is a house. Summer came right away, without a build-up. In May it was already below 25, and the grass rose quickly and high. The smell of warmed earth and blooming bird cherry, which grew up behind Nina's house. 2 hired people worked on Gromov's farm, young guys from the village, Vlad and Seryoga. Both without much experience, but with hands and desire. Nikolai taught them, patiently, without shouting, as people who know the business down to the last nail can teach. The cows gave milk, 2 buckets in the morning, 1.5 in the evening. Alina agreed with the store in the regional center. Every 2 days a batch of milk went their cans, and they paid for it in real money. Not much yet, but honestly and steadily. The garden was green and thick. The tomatoes were stretching up, both Marina S. cherry tomatoes and Olenina S., planted nearby. It was no longer possible to figure out where whose bushes were, and there was no need. Next. This was her village, her yard, her chickens, she knew that for sure. Nina once told her neighbor, stopping at the fence, have you seen Koka, 10 years younger, and his woman is gold, I'm telling you. Sonechka already calls them daddy. Fuck you, the neighbor didn't believe it, that's the cross, said Nina. The neighbor looked through the fence at the Gromovsky yard. There Nikolai was fixing something by the shed and whistling, and Alina was standing by the summer kitchen, braiding her hair, tanned, laughing at something to herself. Well, said the neighbor, and thank God. In the evening, the 3 of them sat on the porch. The sun set behind the field, slowly, as always in the summer, for a long time and beautiful. The sky was pink and golden, and the first stars appeared in the part where it was already getting dark. It was warm, it smelled of grass cut somewhere and a little manure, the normal, living smell of a working farm. Sonia fell asleep between them. She leaned against Nikolai, clutched Zarya's tail in her fist, and Zarya lay next to her on the step. She fell asleep quickly, easily, as children who have run around, played enough and have nothing to worry about fall asleep. Nikolai said quietly, "I'm glad you knocked." Alina smiled, looking at the field. "I almost didn't knock. I thought, I'll wait and leave. A couple more minutes and I would have left. It's good that I didn't leave." She turned her head and looked at him, then put her head on his shoulder. They sat, and it got dark, and the stars arrived one after another. The lights were on in the house. Thank you for listening to the end. If the story was interesting for you, subscribe to the channel and like so as not to miss new one's video.